It's time to eat.
What are you hungry for?
Sit down and get ready to consume an abundance of fantasy football knowledge from Ross Tucker and Joe Dolan.
Feed me now. I'm starving.
On the Fantasy Feast Eating Podcast.
Yeah, let's eat, baby. It is the Fantasy Feast Eating Podcast. We are presented by DraftKings. Our guy Tom Brolley is back with his spring reports, which are invaluable. Tom, of course, from fantasypoints.com, same place as Joe Dolan. When you go over to fantasypoints.com, use that code 24feast for the discount. Why not? And you're telling them that we sent you over there, which is great. He's at Tom Brolley. Joe is the fantasy gangster at FG_Dolan. I am merely Ross Tucker at Ross Tucker NFL, former NFL offensive lineman, 5 teams, 7 years now. I get a chance to call games on television for CBS or on the radio for Westwood One, which is a blast. I do the preseason games for the Eagles, which will be here before you know it. And I got all these podcasts. Ross Tucker Football Podcast 3 times a week till the season starts. Even Money Betting Podcast came out yesterday. Of course, the College Draft Podcast with Emery is a ton of fun as well. We need to get into the NFC and some of the things we heard about in the spring that were notable. If you missed it, last week we talked about some of the things that we felt like mattered coming out of the spring reports in the AFC, whether it's Bengals stuff or Colts stuff or Chiefs stuff. So go back and check that out if you didn't. We also need to give out a couple more entries into the best ball draft. We're doing a best ball draft over at DraftKings, where, by the way, you can use the code Ross. But we're doing a best ball draft, which is awesome. Robert Anthony, you are our 4th pick. Come on down. Joel Buckwalter, you are number 5. So we've got 5 of the 10 spots solidified so far. I will likely announce the other 5 next week. So it's crazy easy, whether it's like Spotify or Apple Podcasts, just rate and review any of the shows and then forward it to me. Do a screenshot, forward it to me, Ross at rosstucker.com. You're probably in. Take advantage of a sponsor, screenshot it or forward the email to me, Ross at rosstucker.com. You're probably in. And if you don't make this one, you get a great chance to make the July or the August best ball drafts with me and Joe Dolan. All right. Keep those coming, by the way. We love getting you guys involved in these best balls and going head-to-head against you. It's fun, actually, to see who you guys end up picking. Feels like you listen to the show, probably because you do listen to the show with a lot of your picks out there. All right. So let's start, Tom, with the NFC this week. Last week you talked about Anthony Richardson, which was interesting. You talked about T. Higgins as well as Joe Burrow. And even our conversation at the end of the show last week about Travis Kelce, I thought was really informative and interesting. You know, which I think, Joe, is a point we need to make, which is that sometimes when a team is doing what's best for them and best for winning and Super Bowls, all that stuff, it's not what's best for us if we're drafting the player for fantasy football. Travis Kelce might be healthy all year, might be more productive or better than he was last year, but might not play as much, so it might not help your fantasy team as much.
Yeah, a guy has to be on the field. Ross, you and I discussed this a few times a couple of years ago. And obviously, I'm not comparing Travis Kelce to this player, but I'm going to bring up the rule of thumb that is one of my rules of thumb for fantasy football. There was the analytic community who was obsessed with athleticism and, combine testing. A number of years back was obsessed with this, I think it was either 1AA or Division II, wherever the hell he went to school. Jeff Janis, he played for the Green Bay Packers, and he was an athletic freak. And every year, the fantasy community would be like, Jeff Janis, keep drafting Jeff Janis with your last pick and whatever. The problem was he never got on the field. So I call this phenomenon Janis's razor. And what Janis's razor is it doesn't matter if you like a player. It doesn't matter if you think the player's the greatest player of all time. It doesn't matter if you think this player's getting screwed. The coach actually has to put him on the field because he's not going to score fantasy points from the bench. And obviously, Travis Kelce is a Hall of Famer, and Jeff Janis is selling insurance or whatever it is he's doing right now. But the problem is the Chiefs now have all the incentive in the world, to try to three-peat. And I'm sure Travis Kelce, who's been a team player his entire life, and most certainly now, wants to three-peat. And if that means he's catching 70 passes this year instead of 100 because he's playing 65% of the snaps instead of 95% of the snaps, then Travis Kelce is going to do that. He's also older. Ross, you mentioned last week that he's been kind of banged up in recent years, especially last year. That is what I anticipate from Travis Kelce this year. He's already a Hall of Famer. He and his brother both are Hall of Famers. He could retire today, and he'd be a Hall of Famer. So it's all about now team legacy for the Kansas City Chiefs, and I fully anticipate that they're going to be smart with Travis Kelce in his 30s now, as opposed to running him out there on every single snap.
Let's get to some of these NFC topics, Tom. What are some of the ones that really stood out to you?
Well, we can go kind of to the Jeff Janis here. Let's go to the Packers and somebody that hasn't been available nearly enough here through his first two seasons. He was a guy that tested, athletically off the charts. I'm talking about Christian Watson. This guy has been phenomenal when he's played, but just hamstring issues have hampered his career through the first two seasons here. So the Packers sent him to the University of Wisconsin to get his hamstring studied here, and they've found some things that basically his hamstrings aren't balanced enough. He's overcompensating because of his past hamstring injuries. So they've been really working on balancing the strength between his hamstrings, and they're really hoping that this could be something that could keep him on the field and available this year. So really has this Packers passing game is loaded with potential options. We got Romeo Doubs, and Jaden Reed really broke out as a rookie last year. Dontavian Wicks under the radar. Our fantasy points data, he was one of the top players with in terms of yards per route run. So, but Christian Watson has been kind of the default number one wide receiver when he's been available the last 2 years. So all this is saying that Jordan Love is in a pretty good position to play really well. And if we look to this backfield as well, Matt LaFleur has really liked to preferred to use two backs. So they go out and get Josh Jacobs, who's been a bell cow back his first 4 seasons, with the Raiders. And so some thought was like, maybe that he'll be a bell cow back here in Green Bay. But Matt LaFleur kind of, tamped down those expectations a little bit. Of course, they drafted Marshawn Lloyd in the 3rd round. They brought A.J. Dillon back. And basically his philosophy is that, he doesn't want to wear down a back. He wants to spread out the hits over a season. Running back is a very physical position, so he wants to, get these other backs involved. So we've seen Josh Jacobs' ADP slip a little bit here the last couple of weeks since those statements. He's now, more towards the back end of the 4th round, 5th round, where he was like an early 4th round pick before the comments. So on the flip side, Marshawn Lloyd, his ADP has risen a little bit here since those statements. So some interesting things coming out of Packers camp in terms of what this backfield and receiving core is going to look like. It's looking like we could have, if we look at the Packers overall, it's a lot of committees, even their tight ends. Both Luke Musgrave and Tucker Kraft really flashed last year. So it's a good problem to have for Green Bay. They've drafted very well the last couple of years. All these guys are pretty young at the receiver positions. So good problem to have for them. Makes it a little more difficult for us for fantasy, trying to sift through the information and pick out who's going to be the best options out of these receiving core.
They really have drafted well. I mean, when you just name their receivers and their tight ends over the last couple of years, there's certain teams, Joe, that have always just excelled at certain positions. Like the Packers drafting receivers, it feels like the Steelers drafting receivers. It's wild. And then there's other teams like the Patriots that can seemingly never get it right when they draft a receiver. I had not heard that about Christian Watson going to the University of Wisconsin to have his hamstrings studied. I didn't know that. Joe, you saw that?
Yeah, and he found that muscle imbalance. So the Packers in general are going to be interesting because this is a league-winning fantasy football team. It's just a matter of picking the right guys. And it's kind of difficult because, as Tom mentioned, there are committees everywhere. Matt LaFleur talking about Josh Jacobs. Hey, he can be a volume guy, but we don't really want him to be. We like to keep him fresh. Christian Watson, if he stays on the field, this is going to be a guy who's going to win leagues. But Dontavion Wicks is a guy who he got opportunities, and then all of a sudden he was better than any of these receivers. Jaden Reed is actually the first receiver off the board for the Packers. So if you pick the right Green Bay Packers, and this is why they're going to be so important to follow in training camp, if you pick the right Packers, you're going to win fantasy leagues because this offense is going to be good. Jordan Love, obviously, people have anointed him as the next great quarterback, and he certainly had a phenomenal, especially second half of the year in his first year as a starter. It's just a matter of which of these guys is going to be on the field and is going to earn the snaps because, Luke Musgrave could be a great tight end, but Tucker Kraft was arguably better than him. But Tucker Kraft's now missing the offseason program. So there's a lot to suss out here with the Green Bay Packers, but there are league winners on this roster. It's just a matter of finding them. And in best ball drafts, if you're doing a high volume of best ball drafts like Tom and I are, quite frankly, I'm taking shots all over the board at the Green Bay Packers. And because I know there is going to be points scored on this team, it's just a matter of who emerges from those committees.
Labatt Blue Light's a league winner. It's been my league winner for years, ever since I played for the Bills, to be honest with you. Drink Labatt Blue Lights with your friends. Live life to the power of we. I dare you to tell me. You can hit me up on social media at Ross Tucker NFL, at Ross Tucker Pod, if you taste a more delicious light beer than Labatt Blue Light. Always enjoy responsibly beer. Labatt USA, Buffalo, New York. Okay, we got the Packers. What else you got for me, Tom?
Let's go to one of your other former teams here. Let's go to Washington. A very intriguing team here. They go out and select Jaden Daniels, number 2 overall. Really excited about his potential. We touched on last week's episode about Anthony Richardson and the fantasy key for quarterbacks, being able to add a little another dimension, being able to run the ball. And Jaden Daniels certainly did that on his way to winning the Heisman last year at LSU. But we got a little more information from them. Cliff Kingsbury obviously got hired as their offensive coordinator. So we were hoping that they would kind of play a similar style of play that we saw out in the desert for the with Kyler Murray there for quite a few years there. They hired Dan Quinn, so he's a defensive-minded coach. So we were thinking maybe things could change, but if they go out and hire Cliff, hopefully they're looking to play more of an up-tempo offense. And Brian Robinson, the running back, told the media back in May and that they're going to run a lot of no huddle. And if we look at kind of what the Cardinals did under Cliff Kingsbury, they were at 33% no huddle in 2022 and up at 37% in 2021. So we like these offensive environments where we're going to get a few more plays off. I mean, we kind of touched on it with Kelsey. You got it. The more plays, the better for fantasy offenses. So looks like Washington's going to play at a quicker pace. With Jaden Daniels at quarterback here. I grabbed a 14-1 ticket on him right after the draft to be the offensive rookie of the year. Feeling pretty good about that one. It's dropped down to
what?
Yeah, I know. He's down to like
14-1 for Jaden Daniels.
Yeah, Caleb Williams was like Caleb Williams was a massive favorite. Now it's down to like 7-1. So I think a few of our subscribers were able to get on that. So, but everything coming out of camp has been pretty positive with Daniels. A lot of talk that he's the first one in the building. There was talk that him and Luke McCaffrey, Christian McCaffrey's brother, They're the first two people in the building at 5:45 a.m. They're running through tape and working together. Before practices even start. So some good vibes coming out of there. Makes me think back a little bit to last summer. I'm not saying that they're going to have this kind of success, but we saw a lot of positive vibes coming from C.J. Stroud and Tank Dell last summer, and that carried right over into training camp and the preseason. Of course, Tank Dell had that huge first preseason game, and his ADP skyrocketed there. So some good vibes coming from Washington right now, at least fantasy-wise, with Jaden Daniels and this offense here, with Cliff Kingsbury looking to fire off a lot of plays this year.
I think you had talked about that previously, hadn't you, Joe? That you had noted that too, right?
Yeah, and when you have somebody with Jaden Daniels' skill set, and this is why our guys at Fantasy Points, Scott Barrett just put out an article about this, but our projections at Fantasy Points, our guy Chris Wecht from Fantasy Points Dead has kind of developed now an algorithm for our projections, and he has Jaden Daniels higher than just about anybody in the industry. As a matter of fact, I would certainly say it's definitely higher than anybody in the industry. And the thing that he's been saying is, guys, I can't move him down unless you want to tell me that he's going to miss games. And maybe he does. Maybe he's very skinny, and he plays a style where he's going to take some hits. But he's like, they're going to run so many plays. He's an unbelievable runner. So let's look at somebody like Justin Fields. Justin Fields, to this point, I don't want to hear any arguments, okay? Justin Fields has been a bad NFL quarterback. That's why the Bears moved on from him. That's why they drafted Caleb Williams, because Justin Fields has been a bad NFL quarterback. They basically gave him to the Steelers. But when Justin Fields starts, Justin Fields has been a fantastic fantasy quarterback. The downside for Jaden Daniels, if he plays, is probably Justin Fields. Not a good passer, but an unbelievable runner, and that's his downside. I'm not trying to say Jaden Daniels is going to be a bust and he's going to wind up on his second team in 3 years. That's not what I'm trying to say. I'm just saying that's his downside as a fantasy player. So if he's starting, I have to imagine he's going to be very useful for fantasy purposes, and the more plays they run, the more opportunities for Jaden Daniels to score.
Love it. Give me another one, Tom.
Yeah, let's go over to Atlanta. A lot of good talk coming out of Atlanta here about Bijan Robinson. They kind of realize, everybody in the fantasy industry and anybody that had eyes watching the Atlanta Falcons last year, that he was underutilized last year by Arthur Smith, and you use a top pick like that. We want to see more, give him the dang ball, and it just wasn't happening last year. But we have both Zach Robinson, the new offensive coordinator who comes from Los Angeles, and Sean McVay, who they've tended to use bell cow backs. They've really funneled a lot of touches to their backs over the years. Even Raheem Morris, I saw a little clip floating around this week talking to The Athletic, I believe it was, that how much they want to get him more involved as a runner. And it just was a split backfield here with Tyler Algier last year. Just not 12.6 carries per game. If you're going to use a top 10 pick on a back like that, you feel like you should get a little bit more out of him. So the carry share was at 41%, 33rd overall at the position. Just not acceptable for a top back like this. So we loved his passing game work last year. He finished behind only Christian McCaffrey in route share last year, ran 398 routes overall, which was the most at the position. So we love that facet of his game. Hey, keep him involved in the passing game, and if we can get just even like 4 or 5 more carries per game, and down at the goal line, that was another area where he finished 56th in carry share in terms of carries inside the 5-yard line, which just not acceptable. So looks like things are going to change here we're very excited overall about this Falcons offense, moving from Arthur Smith to Zach Robinson. Going to see a lot more, 11 personnel. They go out and sign Kirk Cousins. We know they're going to sling the ball all around the field a little bit more. We're feeling pretty good about Drake London and Kyle Pitts overall. But also to this backfield, it looks like Bijan Robinson is going to get used like a top 10 pick. Fantasy drafters have been very excited about him. He's a top 8 pick in best ball drafts. So looks like things are looking up here for Bijan Robinson after a little bit of a, it wasn't like a bad year, but just wasn't used quite enough to our liking. And it looks like he's going to be, at least a top 3 back here. We got Christian McCaffrey at the top of the board, and he's duking it out with Breece Hall right now to be a top 3 back right now.
So funny, Joe, because if the Falcons had Kirk Cousins last year, Arthur Smith would still be their coach.
Yeah.
And we don't really know how they would have used any of these guys. Drake London, Bijan Robinson, Kyle Pitts. It's hard to know when they clearly were trying to minimize the quarterback position as much as they could. Heck, if he probably just played Heineke the whole time, said Desmond Ridder. Desmond Ridder, he had to have set the record for untimely turnovers last year. I mean, at least 4 of their losses, it was like they got a lead. There's like a minute left. Here comes the Desmond Ridder turnover. It was crazy.
I mean, Ridder was terrible, but I think you can make the argument with Arthur Smith. Oh, he was tied to these bad quarterbacks, but he kind of endorsed the bad quarterbacks, right? Like, it was kind of his thing. Like, he went down with the Desmond Ridder ship. They didn't have the ability to get Kirk Cousins last year, but I think Arthur Smith was kind of like, hey, I think Desmond Ridder can do it, and I'm going to run this offense where I'm going to try to confuse everybody by not giving the ball to our good players, and that was his downfall, because I actually tend to think Arthur Smith is a pretty creative play designer. It's just that those creative plays were strapped down by a bad quarterback and a coach who was often trying to outthink himself.
You got one more, Tom?
Yeah, we'll do we got a quick one. We were talking about Zach Robinson a little bit there. He comes from the Rams, and how they've loved to use a bell cow back, and Kyron Williams was that guy last year. He really broke out. Came from, he was a waiver wire darling, and week 2 there after the week 1 performance, and Cam Akers eventually got traded, and but he, our antenna is up here a little bit this spring. Was missing some time for foot and ankle issues again. They caused him to miss 12 of his first 34 games. And this is one, these foot and ankle issues tend to linger a little bit. And a guy that, needs, running backs have to have good feet and good ankles. They're making cuts and, have to have top end speed to get away from defenders. So a little bit of an antenna was raised on this one. He did come back and eventually practiced a little bit at the end of, in mandatory minicamp, but we also had earlier this spring them using a 3rd round pick on Blake Corum. Some of the talk was just that, hey, they needed a good backup, which is probably playing into that a little bit, but he's also a guy that can easily, kind of play on all 3 downs. There was talk that he was getting some passing game work, so this is just a situation to watch here a little bit. Kyron Williams' ADP has fallen a little bit because of these reports, but Blake Corum is certainly in the mix here. So we'll be watching those foot and ankle issues for Williams here in training camp. Hopefully everything checks out, but he was a key piece for a lot of fantasy championship teams last year, and his health is certainly one of the bigger things we'll be watching in training camp.
And Joe, I don't know if it's from the beat writers or his teammates, but the early returns on Blake Corum sound pretty positive out there.
Yeah, and it's just a matter of what's going to happen here. And this is another, I talked about the Packers as being kind of a league-winning situation. Well, here's another, because the Rams always use a bell cow running back. It's just a matter of the fact that throughout the years, they've used one for 1 year, and then another guy, and then another guy comes in, and then they go back to the first guy. what's going to happen with Kyren Williams, because Kyren Williams right now, his production at the end of last year suggests he should be getting drafted with Christian McCaffrey, with Bijan Robinson, with Breece Hall. The news coming out and the fact that they spent a pick on Blake Corum has him going in the second, even third round. So what's the disconnect? Kyren Williams is either going to be a god-awful pick or he's going to be an amazing pick. There's not going to be anything in between. I've leaned more towards the latter. We got spooked last year, Ross, by these day 2 running backs getting drafted, and unfortunately, it caused us to miss on players like Ken Walker and Travis Etienne. Is it going to happen again with Kyren Williams?
Check these guys out on social media at FG_Dolan, at Tom Brolley. I'm at Ross Tucker NFL. Get your best ball entries in. We want to take you down. I'm stuffed. We're done.
Thanks for tuning in to Fantasy Feast. Make sure to also check out the Ross Tucker Football Podcast, Even Money, and College Draft, all on the DraftKings Network, YouTube, or subscribe to the podcast on your favorite platform.